12 different human species once walked this earth at the same time, and only one of them is still here. That is not a figure of speech. It is one of the most extraordinary facts in the entire history of life on Earth. For most of human prehistory, the planet hosted a remarkable variety of beings that were not quite like us, but were undeniably related to us. They made tools, controlled fire, cared for their dead, and in some cases created art on cave walls that still survives today. And then, one by one, they all disappeared until only Homo sapiens was left standing across every continent on the planet. The question of what happened to the other species of human is one of the most charged debates in all of science. The answer involves climate shifts, ecological competition, interbreeding, and possibly something darker that we may never fully admit. Let's begin with the cast of characters, because most people know only a few of the species that once shared this world with our ancestors. Neanderthals are the most famous, having lived across Europe and Western Asia for roughly 300,000 years before their disappearance. Denisovans are known primarily from genetic evidence and a handful of bone fragments found in a cave in Siberia. Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit, was a small-statured species that lived on the Indonesian island of Flores until remarkably recently. Homo naledi was discovered in South Africa in 2013 and stunned researchers with its unexpected combination of primitive and modern features. Homo luzonensis lived in the Philippines and was only formally described as a species in 2019, rewriting what we knew about island colonization. Homo heidelbergensis likely represents the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and ranged across Africa and Europe. The recently described species from the Nesher Ramla site in Israel may represent yet another distinct population with a complex relationship to known species. There is also Homo erectus, one of the most successful hominin species in history, which survived for nearly 2 million years before finally vanishing. And there is the mysterious Red Deer Cave people of China, whose fossils suggest a possible late surviving archaic population that defies easy classification. This diversity is not ancient history in the way most people imagine, existing so far back as to be irrelevant to the present. Neanderthals were alive in Gibraltar as recently as 40,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens had already spread across much of the world. Homo floresiensis survived until at least 50,000 years ago on Flores, possibly even more recently than that, based on some interpretations. Homo naledi's remains have been dated to between 200 and 300,000 years ago, meaning it overlapped with early Homo sapiens in Africa. Denisovans appear to have survived in Asia until at least 50,000 years ago, and possibly much later in isolated highland regions. This was not a world where different human species lived in politely separated territories and never encountered one another. The genetic evidence makes clear that these populations met, interacted, and in many cases produced offspring together that were viable and fertile. Modern non-African humans carry roughly 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes as a direct result of interbreeding events. People of Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian descent carry an additional layer of Denisovan ancestry on top of their Neanderthal inheritance. Some populations in South Asia appear to carry ancestry from yet another archaic population that has not yet been identified from physical fossils. The picture that emerges from genetics is not of separate species living in isolation, but of a complex web of occasional hybridization and gene flow. Yet, despite this interbreeding, all of the other human species eventually disappeared, leaving Homo sapiens as the sole surviving member of the genus Homo. Why this happened, and whether it was a gradual process or something more sudden, is where the real scientific controversy lives. The first major hypothesis for archaic human extinction focuses on climate and environmental change as the primary driver. The late Pleistocene, the geological epoch spanning from roughly 125,000 to 12,000 years ago, was a period of dramatic and rapid climatic fluctuation. Ice ages advanced and retreated, sea levels rose and fell, and ecosystems transformed on timescales that made adaptation genuinely difficult. Neanderthals, in particular, had survived multiple glacial cycles before their final disappearance, so they were clearly capable of handling climate stress to some degree. But the final extinction event coincides with both a period of climatic instability and the expansion of anatomically modern humans into Neanderthal territory. This correlation does not prove causation, but it makes climate an unlikely complete explanation for what happened to every archaic human population across the entire planet. The second major hypothesis involves what researchers call competitive replacement, the idea that Homo sapiens simply outcompeted other species for resources. This hypothesis does not require direct violence, just the gradual erosion of another population's ability to sustain itself through reproduction. If modern humans were more efficient hunters, or could survive on a wider range of foods, or had more sophisticated tools for processing resources, the math could work out brutally. Even small differences in foraging, efficiency, or reproductive success, compounded across hundreds of generations, can drive a competing population to extinction without a single violent encounter. Evidence for this kind of competition comes from examining what happens to prey species when modern humans arrive in a new territory. Megafauna extinctions across Australia, the Americas, and Europe correlate strongly with the timing of modern human arrival in each region. The third hypothesis, one that has become increasingly difficult to avoid as research accumulates, involves direct conflict or violence between species. The archaeological record provides some evidence of trauma to Neanderthal remains that could be consistent with interpersonal violence, though interpretation is contested. Ethnographic records of what happens when modern human groups with technological advantages encounter other groups with less sophisticated technology are not encouraging reading. The history of colonial encounters on Earth provides abundant evidence that even within our own species, technological asymmetry often ends very badly for the less advanced group. Extending this pattern to encounters between different species where the cognitive and technological gap might have been larger is an uncomfortable but not unreasonable line of thinking. Most researchers today favor what is sometimes called the multi-species mosaic model, which incorporates all of these mechanisms simultaneously. Different archaic populations likely disappeared for different reasons, with climate playing a larger role in some cases and competition in others. The Neanderthal extinction probably involved a combination of competition with modern humans, interbreeding that diluted the Neanderthal gene pool over generations, and climate stress. The Homo floresiensis case is particularly interesting because their extinction coincides with evidence of early human arrival on Flores around 50,000 years ago. The Denisovan case remains the most mysterious because we know them primarily from DNA rather than from a substantial fossil record and behavioral archaeology. One of the most striking recent discoveries concerns just how cognitively sophisticated at least some of these archaic species actually were. Neanderthals, long caricatured as brutish and intellectually simple, have now been demonstrated to have created jewelry, used pigments for body decoration, and possibly created cave art. A site in Spain called La Pasiega contains geometric symbols that predate the arrival of modern humans in Europe by tens of thousands of years. If this dating is correct, and it remains debated, then Neanderthals were engaging in symbolic behavior before our species ever arrived in their territory. Neanderthals buried their dead, sometimes apparently with flowers based on pollen evidence from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, though this interpretation has also been challenged. Homo naledi presents its own cognitive puzzle because the species appears to have used a deep cave system called the Rising Star Cave in ways that suggest ritual behavior. The placement of remains in an inaccessible cave interior, apparently over a long period of time, has led researchers to propose that Homo naledi may have practiced some form of mortuary ritual. This is remarkable because Homo naledi had a brain roughly 1/3 the size of a modern human brain, challenging assumptions about the cognitive prerequisites for symbolic behavior. The Denisovans, despite being known from very little physical material, and have left genetic traces suggesting they were adapted to high-altitude environments in ways that benefited their descendants. Tibetan populations carry a Denisovan variant of the EPAS1 gene that allows efficient oxygen use at altitude, an adaptation that Denisovans apparently developed and passed on through interbreeding. This means that, in a real and concrete sense, archaic human adaptations still live on in modern populations, even though the species themselves are gone. The question of what exactly made Homo sapiens the survivor when all others disappeared continues to generate productive scientific disagreement. Language as we know it, with its fully recursive grammar and capacity for complex symbolic communication, has been proposed as a critical advantage. If modern humans could communicate about abstract concepts, plan hunts collaboratively using shared mental models, and transmit accumulated knowledge across generations more efficiently, these advantages could compound over time. While Neanderthals likely lived in small bands of perhaps 10 to 30 individuals, modern humans may have been able to maintain functional social networks several times larger. Larger social networks mean more opportunities to exchange information, trade resources across distance, and form alliances that could be activated during times of local stress. This difference in social architecture, if real, would have had cascading advantages in terms of cultural innovation, geographic flexibility, and resilience to local extinction events. The archaeological record supports the idea that modern humans maintained much longer distance exchange networks than Neanderthals did during the same period. Marine shell ornaments, ochre, and other materials found at Homo sapiens sites traveled hundreds of kilometers from their points of origin, suggesting wide-ranging exchange networks. Comparable evidence for long-distance exchange in Neanderthal sites is much rarer, though it does exist in some contexts and near the end of the Neanderthal period particularly. There is also the question of how modern humans processed ecological information compared to archaic relatives. The capacity to create detailed mental maps, track seasonal resource fluctuations, and share this information through language and art may have given Homo sapiens a decisive edge in exploiting environments efficiently. When resources became scarce during glacial periods, a population with better information sharing could buffer against local extinction in ways that less communicative groups could not. The story of why we are the last human species standing is ultimately not a simple triumph narrative. It is a story of loss, of biological richness that no longer exists, of cognitive and physical diversity that was permanently erased from the world. Neanderthals were not failed humans. They were a successful species in their own right that survived for hundreds of thousands of years in challenging environments. Homo floresiensis was an evolutionary experiment in miniaturization that worked remarkably well until something ended it abruptly around 50,000 years ago. Homo naledi challenges almost every assumption we make about what cognitive complexity requires in terms of brain size and physical architecture. The Denisovans may have been among the most widely distributed archaic humans, ranging from Siberia to Southeast Asia, and contributing DNA to populations across a vast geographic range. Each of these species represents a different answer to the question of what it means to be human, a different set of trade-offs and adaptations shaped by specific environments and pressures, and we will never fully know them because they are gone, leaving behind only fragments of bone, scattered tools, and the genetic echoes they left in our own DNA. Recent years have seen an explosion of ancient DNA research that continues to reveal new layers of complexity in archaic human history. A Homo sapiens skull from Romania, dating to roughly 40,000 years ago, was found to contain 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA, the highest proportion ever recorded. This individual had a Neanderthal ancestor just 4 to 6 generations back, making the interbreeding between these species far more recent and intimate than previously imagined. Genetic analysis of remains from Cima de los Huesos in Spain pushed the known Neanderthal lineage back to at least 400,000 years ago. Research from Denisova Cave in Siberia revealed that a single individual, nicknamed Denny, had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, proving that even these two archaic species interbred. This single finding from a bone fragment smaller than a thumbnail completely transformed our understanding of how these populations interacted. The scale of what ancient DNA analysis has revealed in just the past 15 years suggests that the full picture of human diversity in the late Pleistocene is far more complex than we imagined. There were likely additional archaic populations that have not yet been identified from physical fossils and that we know about only from statistical shadows in modern genomes. The so-called ghost populations detected in genetic analyses of modern humans suggest that the web of interbreeding and population mixing was even more extensive than the current fossil record indicates. What does all of this mean for how we understand ourselves as a species? Perhaps most importantly, it means that the concept of a single linear progression from primitive to modern humans is a significant oversimplification of what actually happened. Human evolution was not a ladder with modern humans at the top and all other species as failed attempts or evolutionary dead ends. It was a rich and branching bush with multiple species living simultaneously, interacting, competing, interbreeding, and sometimes helping each other survive. The adaptations we carry in our genomes from Neanderthals and Denisovans are not contamination or historical accidents. They are part of our inheritance and part of what we are. The high-altitude adaptation carried by Tibetans came from Denisovans, who figured out how to live on the Tibetan plateau long before modern humans arrived. Certain immune-related genes of Neanderthal origin persist in modern human populations because they were genuinely useful adaptations to the European and Asian disease environments. We are not just the descendants of one people, we are the inheritors of multiple lineages that came together over hundreds of thousands of years across multiple continents. The last Neanderthal, whoever they were, died without knowing they were the last, in a world that was rapidly becoming entirely occupied by a different kind of human. The last Homo floresiensis likely had no awareness that their kind was ending, living on their island without any sense of the broader story they were part of. We are the only ones left who can tell that story, and the responsibility of telling it accurately and with proper respect for what was lost belongs to all of us. The answer to why we are the last human species is still being worked out by researchers who study ancient bones, cave sediments, and sequences of ancient DNA. But the question itself, why us and not them, is one that connects directly to what we are, where we came from, and how we should think about our place in the natural world. We are not the inevitable endpoint of human evolution. We are one branch that happened to survive when all the others went extinct. That fact should generate as much humility as it does curiosity about the extraordinary and now silent diversity that preceded us. The story of human diversity does not end with extinction, but continues in every living person on Earth today. Each modern human carries traces of ancient encounters in their DNA that researchers are only now learning to read. The field of paleogenomics has transformed the study of human origins more dramatically in the past decade than any other single development. Before ancient DNA analysis became possible, everything we knew about archaic humans came from bones, teeth, and the tools they left behind. Now we can read the genetic sequences of individuals who lived tens of thousands of years ago and trace exactly how their genes flow through modern populations. This technology has fundamentally changed the kinds of questions that can be asked about archaic human populations and their relationships. Neanderthals are no longer a shadowy mystery species known only from heavy brow ridges and hand axes recovered from European caves. They are a population with a genetic history that can be traced, with population sizes that can be estimated, and with specific adaptations that can be identified. The same is increasingly true for Denisovans. Despite the almost complete absence of physical fossil material from that species, genetic analysis of a single finger bone and a few teeth from Denisova cave has revealed as much about Denisovan biology as decades of traditional paleontology might have. The discovery of ancient DNA in permafrost sediments without any visible bone fragments has opened up an entirely new avenue of research. Environmental DNA, genetic material shed by organisms and preserved in sediment layers, can now be extracted and sequenced from sites where no fossil bones survive. This means the distribution of archaic human species can potentially be mapped even in regions where the preservation conditions for bone are poor. Initial results from sedimentary ancient DNA are already expanding the known range of Neanderthals and Denisovans beyond what the fossil record alone suggested. What we are learning is that archaic human populations were more widespread more interconnected, and more diverse than even the optimistic scenarios of a decade ago proposed. The geographic range over which interbreeding occurred between modern humans and archaic populations was apparently vast, spanning multiple continents and tens of thousands of years. Some researchers have proposed that the process of absorbing archaic genetic material actually benefited early modern human populations as they expanded into new environments. Pre-adapted genes from populations that had been living in specific regions for hundreds of thousands of years could have been immediately useful to newly arrived modern humans. This process, sometimes called adaptive introgression, may explain why certain archaic genetic variants persist in modern populations at frequencies higher than random chance would predict. The immune genes of Neanderthal origin found at elevated frequencies in modern Eurasians appear to have been positively selected, meaning they genuinely helped their carriers survive. Denisovan variants affecting metabolism and altitude adaptation appear similarly to have been retained because they conferred genuine advantages in specific environments. Far from being a contamination of a pure modern human genome, archaic admixture appears to have been a significant source of adaptive variations for expanding Homo sapiens populations. This reframes the entire story of archaic human extinction in an important way because the genes of these species did not disappear, they persisted in a new form. Neanderthals, as a distinct biological population, went extinct, but Neanderthal genes continue to influence the immune response, skin biology, and metabolism of billions of living people. Denisovans as a population went extinct, but Denisovan genes allow people to breathe efficiently at high altitude on the Tibetan Plateau today. In a very real biological sense, these archaic species are still with us, even though we are the only ones walking around with the full package. The question of consciousness and inner experience for these archaic species is one that science cannot fully answer, but that is impossible to avoid raising. Neanderthals had brains as large as modern human brains, and in some regions even larger, though differently shaped in ways that may reflect different cognitive organization. Whether they experienced curiosity, grief, love, fear, and wonder in ways that would be recognizable to modern humans is something we can speculate about but never directly know. The evidence of deliberate burial, the use of pigments and ornaments, and the possible creation of symbolic markings suggests inner lives of some richness and complexity. A Neanderthal burying a companion in the ground, possibly with flowers, was not simply going through motions without any sense of meaning or loss. Something was being expressed or recognized in that act, even if we cannot know precisely what, and that something connects to our own experience of grief and ritual. The fact that we will never know the full inner lives of these species, their stories, their social structures, their ways of understanding the world, represents an incalculable loss. We know that they were there, that they were real, that they experienced the world and interacted with it over periods of time longer than all of recorded human history. And then they were gone, leaving only fragments, and now finally the molecular traces preserved in the genomes of their partly surviving descendants. The ongoing revolution in ancient DNA analysis means that the story of archaic human extinction is not finished, even though the extinctions themselves happened long ago. every year brings new findings that revise the timeline, expand the known range, or reveal new interbreeding events that were previously unsuspected. The ghost population detected in the ancestry of modern West African populations suggests that at least one other archaic lineage in Africa has yet to be identified from physical fossils. Research on Homo naledi continues to raise questions about the cognitive capabilities of small-brained hominins and what this means for our models of cognitive evolution. New hominin fossils are still being discovered regularly as researchers explore previously uninvestigated regions and apply new dating techniques to previously unstudied material. The field that once had a handful of known species now has dozens, and the relationships between them grow more complex with every major publication. We are living through a golden age of human origins research precisely because the tools available to researchers have expanded so dramatically in such a short period of time. The question of why we are the only human species left may ultimately have no single clean answer, but the process of asking it continues to reveal extraordinary truths about what we are.